It's really cold outside tonight. So, like, I get really fucking annoyed. Like, of all the things that, various culture critics tend to do, one of the things that kind of bothers me the most is, like, making generalizations about what fandoms believe and think and stuff like that. Like you see this all the time where people are like, oh, like when some fucking hit piece comes out and they're like, this newest example of thing that's this type of thing is bad. Why do they keep making this? Like, maybe it's the new Transformers movie comes out, and it's like, why do these keep being made? Or, butt anime. Like, oh, anime about girls butt battling with each other or whatever. Like, wow, this is so terrible. Why do people keep making this? And, like, whatever your opinions about, like, the quality of the, the example that they're discussing, the thing that bothers me is they take the step to then making some kind of generalized judgment about the people who consume that media. Like I guess we all do that, right? Like, you think of, like, Call of Duty. Who likes Call of Duty? Fucking, dude bros, college frat guys who chug booze and, whatever. And who likes this butt battle anime? Just nerdy neckbeard otaku who have never even touched a woman before and have body pillows and shit. And shit like that always fucking pisses me off. When it, like, even when it's, like, a group that I don't belong to, but selfishly, especially when it's a group that I belong to. Like, you're making like, haven't been any stranger to fucking culture critics making generalized statements about gamers in recent years. And they're always like, these fucking shit slingers, these obtuse, fucking the Lee Alexander article that started it all, with the Gamers Are Dead article, where it's like, these obtuse shit slingers, these blah blah blah, oh, the people who like games are all these terrible things. And stuff like that is always, like, beyond just insulting, it bothers me because it's completely insubstantiated. Jim Sterling does a lot of fucking stupid videos like this too, where he's like, oh, generalized statement about this group of people, and I'm like, well, I'm not like that. Like, you're making this statement about this group of people, and you could say that I'm part of that group of people, and you're not describing me. Like, I'm standing right here, explain me. Like, am I the exception, or what the fuck are you talking about? This rant you're having doesn't fit my experiences at all. And if that's your argument, like, oh, like, I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about, in general. It's a generalization by definition. I wasn't saying, if you think I'm talking about you, that says more about you than it does me. But it's like, you said gamers. I'm a gamer. You were talking about me. You can't just, like, brush it aside and say, oh, you're an exception. You made a fucking statement that's completely insubstantiated. What if I'm an exception, what are you fucking basing it on? What is the generalization that you are talking about? And, beyond, like, the scientific argument that, like, if there is an exception, then you're wrong. Like, you can't say, like, the phrase, the exception that proves the rule is totally full of shit. If there's an exception, that means it's wrong, and you need to start over, because if one thing in the entire, like, every single other thing in that group, 99% of the group, could be what you're describing, but if there's even one that isn't, you fucked up. It's not true. You can't say 100% of this group is this, and then have one guy stand up and go, I'm not. You're the exception that proves the rule. No, your rule is wrong, because I literally just disproved it wrong. But even then, what are you basing this assumption of what the general of your generalization on? Especially when it's people who aren't even part of the community that they're talking about. And these culture critics never are. Like, the motherfuckers who are, like, complaining about the butt battle anime, they clearly don't know anything about anime. If you read this article about the butt battle, I don't know what it's fucking called, but it's an anime where, like, girls in swimsuits, but it's like a real thing, but my only exposure to it's like in DOA Extreme. There's a minigame in DOA Extreme 3 where you can, like, try and knock them off the thing into a swimming pool. And apparently there's an anime about that now, and everyone's posting GIFs. It's really funny. Where, in the article, it's like, oh, this new trend of fan service in anime. And I'm like, wow, so this is your first anime you've ever seen in your entire life, huh? You've never seen an anime before, ever. That's the only conclusion I can take away from the statement that this recent trend of fan service in anime. What are you fucking talking about? Like, were you born yesterday or something? You can go back fucking 20, 30 years, and it's pretty much just a deluge of fan service. As in, with any fucking media. Guess what? Like, you want to take movies, if you include porn, 90% of movies is porn. Because there's so much more porn than there is any other kind of fucking film. Just, because there's so much porn in the world. So, of course, there's a shit ton of fucking fan service anime. Like, it doesn't mean anything, and the people, and enjoying that kind of show, unironically, even, because people who like things ironically are fucking hipsters, doesn't say anything about that kind of, about the person who enjoys that stuff. It's like, you're not a bad person because you enjoy a certain kind of media that's being labeled as problematic or whatever. But the generalization gets made, like, all sweeping statement about everyone who likes this kind of thing, by someone who isn't in the group that they are talking about. They're a complete outsider looking in, going, oh, if you like this, everyone who likes this must be like this. And if you're like, and everyone who's, enjoys this kind of media is like this. I'm not. Shut up. I wasn't talking about you then. Well, then who the fuck were you talking about? How do you know? Who are you? Who are you to say, oh, this is the this is what the general, majority of the people who are into this thing are like? What are you basing that on? You clearly don't have any first-hand experience. You're just concocting this completely negative straw man outlook of a group that you assume must exist. Because you don't like that thing, you assume that everyone who does like it is like the worst possible kind of human being. And then you get confronted by someone who does like that kind of show, who isn't the worst possible kind of human being. They're just a normal person, just like you. And you're like, oh, well, I wasn't talking about you then. But you were, because you didn't comprehend at the time that someone who does enjoy this type of thing that you find deplorable could possibly be a normal human being. That didn't enter into your mind for a second. You didn't think for a second, oh, I'm sure there's normal, good-natured, sane people who aren't scum dregs of society who like this show. No, you said, if you like this show, you must be a scumdrag of society. Everyone who likes this show must be a scumdrag of society, otherwise why would they make it or whatever, right? But even that, like, they say, like, oh, you're the exception then. I wasn't talking about you. I don't think of myself as being an exception because I don't think exceptions exist. You know, I don't think of myself as an exception because I don't think there is a norm or a generalization to be the exception from. I think everyone is just an individual and we all feel different ways about different things based on our own personal experiences. There's no collective generalization of people who are like, yes, this, and they're all the same kind of person who views things in the same way and thinks the same way about it, and, you know, has a negative, like, all have these negative personal or physical traits that you can just mass label them all by. Those don't exist. People are just all different, and they can agree on certain things for similar reasons, but it's all informed by like, to have any kind of science, like, let's give this the most benefit of the doubt it can possibly be given. And say, if you wanted to have, like, a scientific study to try and figure out what the generalization, the general norm of anime fans or gamers or fucking movie goers or book readers or any kind of group of people who consume media. And you would have to have a massive, if not 100% of the people encompassed in that, you know, group designation. You would need a massive, like, experimental group, like tens or hundreds of thousands of people. And you would have to have different categories that you can place their behaviors and physical appearances and outlooks and beliefs and opinions about the thing they consume in order to, like, have these different designations about them. But and then, like, presumably the category, the cluster that has the most people in it, that's the norm. That's the generalization. That's the general opinion. Right? Except people are just so wildly divergent from one person to the next, so wildly different, that you would have, like, the categories you would try to have would be so completely, would be so, like, generalized and non-specific as to be completely meaningless. You would be able to fit two completely different types of people into one category, even though they don't agree with each other. They think about things different. Like for example, let's say, like, you have one person who likes what's that fucking titty show that's just Trigun with boobs? It's the anime where, like, it's just the guy from Trigun, but she has tits, and she reloads her gun by, like, jiggling her boobs, and the bullets fly out of her boobs, and she reloads her gun like that. There's this great scene where, like, she's got the bullets in her boobs, and she, like, needs to reload, so she goes, and they go, and then she goes, thwack, reload. It was really funny. And you'd have one guy who says, that's my favorite anime, because it's sure, it's really simplistic, but the plot is that it goes into this warrior who's a pacifist who believes in the sanctity of human life and puts all these, like, disadvantages on herself in order to, like, make the task of potentially hurting someone as difficult as it can possibly be for her, and gives an advantage to her enemies who don't have that concern. Like for example, she has, like, the trigger, it's a revolver, so, like, the thumb thing that you pull back on a revolver is like wound so tight that like any other character can't pull the hammer back because they're not strong enough to do it because it's wound so tight. And she ends up like fighting this person who used to be her friend from the same background as her, but has this wildly divergent philosophy and they come to blows and they end up having to fight each other. It's this really emotional conflict of ideology between two people who used to be friends. And then you would have another person who would say, that's my favorite anime because, her fucking tits are so hot. You see those fucking tits, man? God dang, those are some tits. And these are two different people who like the same show and say, like, that's my favorite show for two completely different reasons. I'm not making that up, by the way. All that story about, like, all that shit about how she's a pacifist and whatnot, that's 100% true. That's what that anime is about. But your category has slotted that kind of anime as a fan service show. So, okay, both of these anime fans are fan service otaku weeaboo dudes. They go into that category. Because that show that is their favorite show is a fan service show. And that's even giving a lot of credit to the idea of what the categories would be that you would have in this kind of experiment. Because I still say, like, in order to get any kind of like groupage or consensus on all these wildly divergent opinions, the categories you would have to be so broad as to be completely meaningless. And by doing that, you lose the inherent uniqueness of all these hundreds of thousands of different people's different life experiences. And it just always, and trying to make a generalization like that, as they are doing, reminds me, actually, shockingly, of a Movie Bob article. Like, I used to really be a fan of Movie Bob's work and his stuff with The Game Overthinker, and I would follow him on The Escapist. He used to be worth watching. Well, I used to think he was worth watching. I guess that's an argument for another day, but he had this article on The Escapist about TV tropes, and it was a really, really good article about TV tropes, because in the article, it kind of changed my outlook of what I feel about that website. Because he argues in it, like, wanting to categorize everything is human nature, and it can be fun to have that kind of discussion where you're like, oh, this is just like this, and blah, 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 blah. But you're losing the details by doing that, and the devil is in the details. You can't just say, oh, these two stories are exactly the same because they both fall under this broad, generalized category. Because at that point, like, every story can be whittled down to say, oh, they both fall under this category. Like fucking Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. He toured the fucking world and studied all these different cultures and was like, all these different mythologies, all these different stories, all kind of narrow down to this one kind of story, which is the hero's journey. I mean, if you want to be a pedantic asshole about it, every single story on the spectrum of existence is just the hero story told in a slightly different way. So the idea of, like, trying to, of devaluing the uniqueness of the individual narrative, of the individual story, by trying to aspire it to a category is like, you're losing something by doing that. And the example he gave in that article, which again I think was really good, was like these aliens come down to Earth and are like, we like catalog all the different stories and mythologies of all the different like species and planets in the entire universe, and we came to Earth to see if Earth has any stories that we've never heard before anywhere else in the universe. Does Earth have any unique stories that only happened on planet Earth? And the kid that they're talking to gives some examples of great famous stories, and they're like, no, we've heard these before. These fit under these categories that we have. Tell us something we've never, ever heard before. And the kid says, okay, I'm going to tell them a personal story from my past that no one else in the entire width and breadth and spectrum of the universe, or get any galaxy anywhere, could have this story because it's something that happened to me. And he gives a story of, like, his first kiss. And the aliens go, heard that one. And they're like, what the fuck do you mean heard that one? It's my story. It happened to me. No one else has had that fucking experience. And they're like, no. Your story fits under romantic plot subgroup 5286 alpha beta. And therefore, it's the exact same story as every other story in that group. And he's like, no, it's not. Like, I remember it so vividly, like the smell of corn dogs at the carnival we were at, the taste of her like grape flavored chapstick, the way her hair got into my eyes because it was windy. All of these experiences, no one else, no other story in the entirety of the universe could possibly be the same story as that thing that happened to me. And they're like, well, it is. So go fuck yourself. You know, it fits under this broad category we've invented so that, yeah, it's the same story as everything else in that category. Details be damned. And I thought it raised a really good point about the uniqueness of the individual, like, method that the story is being told. Because, like, you can, you know, kind of take a step back and, like, take the little, like, oh, this is similar to this, and that's taken, like, that's a homage to this thing about any different kind of story, but the person who consumes that story and for whom that's an important story to them, and that made a real impact on their life, and they say, like, you know, like, this story gave me a new idea on how I view the world that I never thought of before, and stuff like that. Like, the only thing that matters is the details. In that case, and even beyond that, even if it's not some big important story about, like, oh, you know, it changed my outlook on the world or whatever, even, like, it doesn't even have to be that big. The little things can be all that matters. Like, one that's an example that I feel is, like, how everyone said, like, oh, the new Tomb Raider is just Uncharted. It's just an Uncharted clone. And I'm like, yeah, there's similarities, and there's definitely, like, borrowing of the basic type of gameplay, but the details are different, and the details make all the difference. Like, the details of what Tomb Raider changed from Uncharted that are broad strokes similar, but when you, like, really take a microscope to it, these are the differences that make Tomb Raider a good game to me, whereas I hate the Uncharted games. And again, you know, I'm standing right here. Explain me. Explain the exception to your generalization. And they're like, oh, those don't matter. Those aren't important. They are the only thing that matter. They're the only thing that's important. So the idea of trying to make a generalization of what all these different people, all these different human beings with a lifetime of experience, life experiences that has changed and informed their outlook on the world. The idea of taking all of those people and just, you know, wiping away all the uniqueness and individuality and saying, like, no, they're all like this. They all fit into this generalized category that I've invented in order to devalue them based on the kind of media they enjoy. I don't like I said, of the things that these people do, of all the different things, that's the one that gets to me the most. Because when you really fucking think about it, it's fucking disgusting. It's like insidious dehumanization. Based on, oh, you like a kind of fucking cartoon that I don't like. Worst justification for genocide ever.